Good evening, world, and welcome to your nightly news broadcast with your host, anchor Scruffy McMustache. Good evening, I'm Scruffy McMustache. Tonight, CCTV comes to you live from the Yinggang International Hotel in Nansha, China, home to dozens of quarantine NCPA teachers and staff. As we wait quietly in our apartment for our dinner to be dropped off outside, we bring you the story of struggle, perseverance, and hope. Tonight, we bring you the story of that most famous fugitive from the coronavirus, Wiki Fresh. For more on this story, we go to our reporter in the living room, Krispy Kreme.
Wiki Fresh, an American math teacher in China, has spent the past 2 months thanking her lucky stars while crossing borders just in the nick of time. Her story begins in the middle of January, when the recent coronavirus situation was looking quite dire in China, and the rest of the world naively believed life would be continuing on as normal. Faced with the temporary closure of her school, Wiki Fresh decided to remain where she was vacationing during Chinese New Year, in the heart of Vietnam, to work remotely with friends in this new online format. Life was easy in Vietnam, but always being on high alert, Wiki Fresh began to grow increasingly more uncomfortable with the instability of her situation and the rapid spread of the new COVID-19. Near the end of February, she fled Vietnam to the comfort of her home in the United States, thinking of Las Vegas as her refuge. However, as time went on, the virus spread with lightning speed. It seemed nowhere in the world was safe. Borders began to close, and on March 17th, Wiki Fresh decided to return to her home in China, where things seemed to be calming down. She felt incredibly lucky, since her flight routed through Canada, and the border between the US and Canada was closing on March 19th. Wiki Fresh was even luckier, as she safely landed in Hong Kong hours before the local government implemented mandatory quarantines for all incoming travelers. Thinking herself safe, her plan was to wait out the storm to avoid being quarantined in China before returning to her home. But on the evening of March 26th, China announced it was closing its borders at midnight on the morning of the 28th. On the cool, crisp spring morning of March 27th, Wiki Fresh decided to try to cross the border into China in a desperate effort to evade being locked out. However, her luck ran short, as she was detained at the border in a cell because of a slightly elevated temperature. Forced to wait in a tiny room over the next 36 hours, she was subjected to numerous tests, a lack of communication, and questionable surroundings, until eventually being released on March 29th and taken to a hotel in Guangzhou for the remainder of her quarantine. This is her story.
All right. Good evening, Wiki Fresh. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Scruffy?
Great. I must ask you a question. Where are you now?
I am in Guangzhou. I am in hotel quarantine in the closer to the city center than you guys are.
All right. Well, it was a long road to get there. Let's start from the beginning. You began in Vietnam, is that correct?
I did begin in Vietnam, and I was a little bit overwhelmed with all the moving around we were doing within Vietnam, and decided to go home to the US, to my dad's house in Las Vegas.
Okay, and when was this?
I think I left it at the end of February to go to my dad's house.
Right, and what made you decide to go to the United States?
I needed some stability, and that was the only place I felt like I could get it, because I didn't at that time feel like China was the best option still.
Could you talk about your experience in the United States?
At the start, it was really good. I was working nights, and on the West Coast, that was a great schedule. and got to enjoy my days and got to see some family, and then gradually started to see things closed. I was only in the US for about a little bit over 2 weeks and started to see things closing down, and it felt like I needed to start keeping to myself because I know how this virus spreads.
Okay, and at that point you started to think about returning to China, or did you think about going or doing something else?
Returning to China.
Okay, so when did you decide to go back?
I think like March 14th or 15th was when I officially booked a flight, but I had been feeling like I should book a flight for a few days beforehand.
Could you tell us about the journey back?
So I flew from Las Vegas to Vancouver, Canada, which I found out the day before my flight that Canada was closing their borders, and that the U.S. was exempt at the time, but by the time I landed in Hong Kong, the border was being closed. And then I flew from Vancouver to Hong Kong and landed about 4 hours before mandatory quarantine was happening in Hong Kong.
So you weren't quarantined when you were in Hong Kong?
I was not. I was free in Hong Kong.
Could you tell us about what that experience was like?
A bit like purgatory. I felt like I knew that the quarantine was coming, and I didn't for sure know, but I speculated that by the time I got to China, I was going to get quarantined no matter what, which turned out to be true. It was unnerving to like be out in the world because it's fairly normal in Hong Kong just with masks on.
Mm-hmm. So when did you decide to come back to the mainland?
I got news on the 26th of March at 1 a.m. from a colleague of ours that the border was closing in 23 hours. So
wow.
I messaged the people who are free in Hong Kong to see if anybody else was coming, and didn't sleep much the rest of that night, and then had one colleague who chose to cross with me.
So you crossed on the 27th of March?
I'm sorry, on the 26th of March.
Okay. Could you tell us about what your experience was like coming back into China?
So when I crossed into China, no, you were right, it's the 27th of March, my bad, sorry. When I crossed back into China, I got temperature checked several times, and the first time that we got temperature checked initially, I did not get to see my temperature, and it was just one of those thermal scanner things, and then they used a mercury thermometer in our armpits every single time since then, pretty much, which I tested at 38 degrees Celsius, and Rachel tested at 37.3, which are both a bit of a fever. Mine was like a actual fever according to that thermometer. And then we had to sit and wait for a while. No one told us anything was high, and I don't know the normal range for armpit temperatures. And we got taken to this like back room at the border where it was like gross and creepy. And then we got told that we needed to sign a form that we were voluntarily asking to be tested for COVID-19, and we weren't really asking for the test, but we were forced to sign it. And then we got separated and brought into rooms, and we received a nasal swab, which was very painful, and a throat swab, and had blood drawn. Both of us sobbed our way through it. And then we were brought in an ambulance with the siren on after that to what's called a fever clinic here, where they did some more tests. They drew blood again, and then did a throat swab and a CT scan at like a makeshift facility that has been built for the virus. And we didn't know any results for a while, and then overnight we had to stay at this facility, which the room that we were in we were separated, first of all, so we weren't actually in the same room, but the bed was really more of a table with a bit of a cushion, At best, you could compare it to one of those beds you see at a doctor's office, and there was like a throwaway paper sheet on it, and blanket and pillow that were both covered in a sheet, paper sheet, and it was not great sleep. At about 5 a.m., I decided I was done trying to sleep and called down on the intercom thing in my room and asked if I had test results, and I tested negative for the virus. And so I thought, oh, good, maybe I'll be able to go somewhere else besides this medical prison. And then a few hours later, the colleague I was with got told that she could go home, and no one told me anything. But they told her that I would be tested again at 4, and that I would be able to leave around 8 that night. And then 4 o'clock came and went, and I did not get tested, and they told me that I would be tested at 8, so that I lost my cool for a bit there. And then they tested me at 8 that night, and I got another negative result in the morning. And so I left the facility at about 9, but this facility, keep in mind, is obviously there's potential sick people around, and there were shared restrooms and no shower. So I was there for over 48 hours without much access to being clean in an environment where being clean is the most important thing. So I've tested negative several times now, but if I caught the virus anywhere, it was there. And then I got taken in an ambulance again back to Shenzhen Bay, where I came in and was waiting for a bus for about 9 hours before I got taken to this hotel in Guangzhou, where I got tested again. So I have now been tested for the virus 4 times. All 4 have come back negative.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I definitely don't have it, I think.
Well, it sounds like quite the ordeal. Now that you're safe in your hotel in Guangzhou, what is on your mind about this experience?
I feel really grateful for several things. One thing is that I have access to a shower. That's pretty great. And a bed that's comfortable. I also, oddly enough, the whole time I was in that facility, I felt really grateful that at least I knew I didn't have the virus, because the access in the US to that test is not great, and that's unfortunate. And I have friends who have lost family members already. And so I am grateful to know that I don't have it and to have access to a test and to be in a country that is keeping us safe, even though maybe my rights were a little bit violated to do it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we go?
Thanks for watching. I don't have anything to add to this. That's funny. I wish I had a joke. I feel like I should have prepared for that.
It's all right. I put you on the spot. All right. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. This is Scruffy McMustache and his exclusive interview with WikiFresh. Thank you all, and good night. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. This has been Scruffy. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. This is Scruffy McMustache.
Can you do a blooper reel?
We will. Don't worry. All right. Serious face. Okay, here we go. All right. Good evening, WikiFresh. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you doing? I don't know your stage name. What's your stage name? I want to say it.
Scruffy McMustache. You can just call me Scruffy.
Scruffy?
Yeah.
All right, let's try that again.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
I don't have a sign off.
All right.